Hellblade II follows Senua on a fun-filled trip to Iceland, trying to hunt down the very people that disgorged her life and sent her on the journey that we experienced throughout the original game. Hellblade 2 starts out with what has to be history's second worst beach landing. It starts with Senua getting the absolute crap kicked out of her when things go wrong on board a slaver vessel. You know how in a lot of movies or games they just show someone waking up on the beach, water gently rolling over them as they magically don't end up face down in a beach made of dead parts and their own vomit? Not Hellblade 2. She gets bounced off rocks and smashed by beach waves, and that's just the first couple seconds, and that sets you off on this trip through a demonic landscape, both beautiful and barren, where Doctor Strange-like fractals construct closed-off puzzle gates that seem like they're created from the same shifting emotions that Senua carries with her. Locations that feel like an organic mimic of Control's shifting building interiors, but with less backrooms geometric shifting paradigms, as the game goes out of its way to reflect the mystical lands Senua is exploring and fighting through. There's a sense of discovery here that isn't actually that far off from the way Control is, except it's all organic. Consistently with her are the same voices, the diabolical double voices of her inner demons, constantly informing, lying, and stating fact in unequal measure, making you question everything you see or hear. For every truth they utter, there's a lie you see, and the opposite as well. Hellblade's unique crux was an unreliable narrator set, or illustrators, making you question everything that happened in the original game. But there at least there was some familiarity with the land, at least so far in the way that the world was one Senua knew, somewhat. Here in the alien lands, Hellblade 2 isn't like that. It's like two golems reading you an audiobook while you're also trying to pay attention to a horror movie and not get killed. Even with Senua's tenuous control over them, more so than she had in the past game, you're consistently wondering what half-truth they're gonna utter this time. To hear even more voices in your head, hit the subscribe button. I'll add another. Also, if you like narrative-driven games like Hellblade 2, it's going to have some insane quotes and cutscenes you can expect. If you like that kind of stuff, check out my video where I thematically edit 101 of the best gaming quotes all together to make one large flowing video here on the channel. Now, it's best to understand what Hellblade and Hellblade 2 are to understand exactly what you're getting. Just like some action games are light on the story or the acting at the expense of everything else, but you can still get that occasional hit. Hellblade 2's intense focus is on the closer camera work during combat, incredible animation, and a profound use of sound, making it leaner in the fighting sections, but still more palatable than the original game. But it's not a Xena warrior woman version of God of War. It's more like a more in-depth Soma, with production values that are staggeringly high, and with the murky, eerie depths replaced by the constant feeling that you're drowning in voices. This is instantly felt when you try to get Senua to climb up a snot-covered Mount Doom at the starting of the game, with two of the meanest personal trainers always whispering in your ears, alternating between, "You got this, girl," and "You can't make it," constantly chattering at you as you climb, changing the physical progress that you make into a lot of progress when it comes to your conscious ability to ignore them. On the first fight, when you leap into the fray against enemies on the beach, whispers in the dark and ghostly calls for help from out of the mist are replaced by very real enemies busting out of the shadows, and you realize that while Hellblade had an excellent grasp on the character-driven dive into mental illness, Hellblade 2 is trying to do something a bit different. When that first enemy leaps out and you finally have a sword, the combat feels up close. Definitely closer than the original game. It's a new tact on angles and camera work that shows the developers want to at least try to advance the stiff combat from the first game. Combat in Hellblade is about light and heavy attacks and a parry and dodge. As you explore, you also gain the ability to power up a mirror covered with runes that let you break away quickly and take out enemies in a combo. But even with that, be aware, huge animations for dodging and parrying means that you're consistently always right at the edge of missing an attack or being overpowered, and indeed some enemies can do that. And I'll get to the very real problems that can create for some players later on. As you explore, fight, and learn about this new land, you take in the idea that this is a dark game and a heavy one. And we've seen heavy games before. Just look at The Last of Us 1 and 2. But where Joel's single-handedly trying to deconstruct the puzzle of the world by killing its pieces so he can see the bare table underneath, Senua's putting a puzzle together that's in 3D, and she has no clear idea what it is, and it also changes every second, so that past piece is in a new place. It's a testament to Ninja Theory and Hellblade that the story doesn't descend into a mess with all of the different parts merging together. One profoundly amazing element in Hellblade 2 is its consistent feeling of being a human. Not instantly moving with an attack or a parry, but a dreaded sense of weight and momentum, where the sword's heavy in someone's hands and where a swing takes time. And while that means its exchanges aren't flicky fast in their reaction times, I can say it's a step up from the original game. And that step up continues with the enemy design and how they're presented. This is another place where it gets top marks. It isn't always some warrior with a cool design, like you found an awesome Viking sword to buy some gear on. Few people don't fear going mad or fear dementia or dozens of other mental illnesses, and you're constantly questioning if the design is real or not on the enemies. Hell, even if the enemy is not an enemy, or consistently making you wonder why an enemy's suddenly made of Tron glass and looks like they rolled around in a kaleidoscope. It's not just the audio cues of crazy that we get, nor just the cutscenes. It's that the combat itself doesn't remove that question mark of the unreliable narrator, and that's the juice and the magic of it all. We see some games where the character is tired, but they instantly come back in the game moment because that's the hero part. But somehow Hellblade's animation work, lighting, effects, and direction let them hold that camera shot a bit longer or extend that effect a bit more. While it is a game that you're just walking forward, going through different experiences and puzzles and environments, and sometimes it feels a bit too narratively driven, and certainly it is linear, it does have a great deal of confidence. It makes for a game that can feel slow, though, where the player may want to work through something at a faster pace than the game is going to let them. It's done to build fear and tension and suspense, but it doesn't always work in those slower parts. And when I look at this title, I have to say there is one part of it that was so astounding and so interesting to me that I could see a lot of people playing it just to see them, and that's the fighting at true night. It's hard to explain until you see it, but the game's use of pure darkness and then fire and particle effects, clouds and dirt flying past you as you move from one enemy to the other is fantastic, and would also be harder in another format that's more pulled out. It's a sense of true claustrophobia that creeps in regardless of the danger, and mixed with the audio, the screams, and the fire and voices, it becomes this crescendo of what the hellness as some dude breathes fire, another one splits a head open of a slave beside you as Senua slips between them clumsily, and then rolls along the ground and leaps up. It's a unique flavor, as we, as gamers, are usually accustomed to a protagonist who, after a period of time, is pretty flawless in their moves and combat. I also like the puzzles more in this title than I did in the original. There were really no times that I got stymied, though there were a couple of times where I had to look around and try to figure out exactly what was going on. The feeling of frustration in the original didn't return. Graphically, the game is incredibly impressive, from the rain realistically whipping down, slightly alternating its patterns on one puddle, then another as it moves with the wind, or the wind tearing down a rocky hill to your right and moving all the grass in different tufts. It's Senua's facial mocap, which is easily some of the best I've ever seen, that surprised me in the game, especially when tracking emotional pain. We've seen games elevate expectations in some areas. Hellblade 2 does that for mocap, and luckily enough for the rest of the game world as well. And that's because of a technical mastery of photogrammetry of real locations. The lands that Senua moves through are incredible. They bring reminders of movies, shows like The Northman, 13th Warrior, Vikings, but with cinematic moments and huge vistas that also reminded me of some of the best scenes and sweeps from shows like Game of Thrones or The Last Kingdom. It's disturbing as it is delightful to see through the eyes of this character as you're exploring, but it's also a bit disconcerting. Some issues I notice, though, do crop up. There's artifacts in some of the fog and light beams, and some shadow glitching, especially with the upscaling text that I'll talk about in a moment. For what it does, it is a up-close, intense look at a character going through some crazy crap, both in their brain and outside in the game world itself, and it merges them all together in one fairly cohesive piece. However, this is also where we get to the most important part when looking at these games. It's not just pretty pictures, scenic moments, or blood and guts. It's how it all is delivered to you, technically. After a pretty short pre-compile of the shaders, it was nice to find that Hellblade 2 really exercised shader stutter for the most part on my system, though a couple times in a long draw-in or exploration moment, I had one or two. The game ran surprisingly well for that expectation, especially when you take into account the gorgeous scenery, the combat character animations, and so forth. Hellblade 2 has the settings that you also hope to see from new games. Intel's, AMD's, Nvidia's, and their own upscaler, and Nvidia's has frame gen support. With options for upscalers, auto-sharpening of the picture, effects across the board, and levels from low to high, on the low end, you will not be getting a silky smooth 60 FPS, especially with the insane detail level we see in Hellblade 2. Lastly, the game is delivered in ultra-wide format. While that's a director and a lead decision, I get why. It's incredibly small when it comes to the segment of monitor owners, and it would have been nice to have had a choice in that matter and not get the letterboxing. As a package, Hellblade 2 is easily one of the best-looking console games I've seen. It's running at 30 FPS there, be aware, and on PC you can make it look just as good. It does hit pretty high in the requirements, something that we've seen before and something that certainly with this presentation you should expect. I didn't have the technical issues I was expecting, but to really get it looking good, you need a high-end system. When it comes to what we're pushing, we're always trying to push the audio in games. Let's talk a little bit about voice, sound, and music. Hellblade 2's use of voice was phenomenal. And here the game has impressed me more so with the consistent use of more voices, more effects, and a focus on maintaining the off-center feel of Senua throughout it. And the change in Senua and her confidence in controlling these voices just a little bit more is shown here. The consistent use of multi-voices, goading, coaxing, and condescending to Senua, making her take decisions or make decisions is even better than the original game. But it's the emotion and the interplay between confidence and cohesion that exists both in Senua's own voice as she wills herself to keep fighting and those in her head doing the same that shows just how unique this title is when it comes to audio. Binaural is the most important, and of course, you will want headphones for this. Now, music. Hellblade 2 is comfortable having no musical soundtrack for large periods of time. Fight tracks are a throbbing, odd drum beat that moves up and down as you fight off mobs and gobs while constantly trying to not get bitten or taken down by some underground creature that looks like they burn themselves for fun. When investigating or listening in on clues, there are a number of tracks, many almost ambient, surreal, and soft. However, later in this game, there is some incredible set pieces where the audio merges perfectly. Action punctuated by timed movements based on massive beats that feel like every part of this comes together. Both in and out of binaural audio sets, it still works, though yes, stereo does lose a great deal of the finesse that you get for the audio samples. Now, I wish I could say everything was great here, but there are a couple things I really did notice and didn't love. I'm not a fan of the tighter dodge timings, especially with a closed-in camera and the insane battle situations. Leaping enemies in particular can be difficult to fight off, and while you get a power to combo enemies once when you get that item of power, it still is a game that trades off some of that responsiveness for an incredible cinematic flair and the desire to dive into what this character is like. You just have to be really aware of what's going on and why it's doing it. The difficulty or problem here is added to by an odd situation. Let me explain here. You can't test out moves outside of combat, and combat, especially as it's teaching, shows you right away that Senua's moves are like a sack of pickled dumps. So dodging and attacking have to be learned. You guessed it, well, dodging and attacking. You can't get a good timing down because you can't test timing unless you're in battle against enemies. It's a small quibble because as you grow more familiar with it, you get better at it. But the idea that she grabs a sword and runs 4,000 yards from one part of a wrecked shipwreck to the next, like she's looking for Tom Hanks on an island somewhere, but doesn't think to once swing her sword or test out how it feels, hurts the first experience of the game. Also, like Hellblade 1, this is a somewhat linear experience. Most of the time, any exploration is for little runes that tell you myth and lore in the game world, so there's not a great deal of replayability here. And that does impact a little bit of the fun factor, which we'll talk about now. While all games are a process of experiences built on engagement, environment, ultimately entertainment, and how any game delivers it in varying degrees, Hellblade 2's entire game is a cinematic masterpiece in game form, but not a masterpiece game. At the end, despite all of its once again closer reliance on smaller, denser engagements, it's incredible. And regardless of this, it's going to appeal to a very particular player. It's razor-focused on delivering the game it wants to, even if that means pacey moments where the gameplay is more game-say, as the characters talk and grunt and slowly crawl through tunnels, move through mystical caverns at glacial speed, and slowly meander down a mountain trail, coming as close as a walking simulator in those times as Hellblade 1 did. Even though it's tried to expand, it's not going to magically collect another group of gamers who are looking for a title like this if they're expecting a ton of action. And in that way, Hellblade 2, I think, is well worth getting on Game Pass or buying if you understand exactly what it is. It is a phenomenal game in that very niche section. It's about 9 hours, though I did a bit of extra puzzling and exploring on side sections to get some lore. Those who want or love incredible stories and pure technical work will love this. Those who find themselves consistently telling two PCs who are furthering the story to hurry up or who look incessantly for the skip button probably won't. But for me, it was insanely enjoyable, something unique that I sort of expected but still made me surprised as I played it. In that way, it's identical to the original game, one hell of a scary-ass, creepy road trip that not all kids would enjoy taking, but the parents are in the front seat just snickering and laughing away every time the kids complain behind them. So that's it for me. I hope you guys enjoy these reviews. If you do, give it a thumbs up. You'll be seeing more from me. Check out the 101 game-edited cutscenes to jump in there and see how all those cutscenes fit together and other crazy stuff coming from us, or check out the podcast. Peace out.
Get out! Get out! Get out! Get out! Get out!